attendees this evening. Would you
Sure.
please go over how the board is supposed to help with the budget and not just have the librarian figure it out, especially
Oh,
when the librarian isn't account inclined?
right. By law, it is the board's responsibility to set the budget and present it to the city and tell the city, here's how much money we need to run the library. Now, I'm not a lawyer, thank goodness. And we all know that some laws don't make a lick of sense and some laws are very cumbersome. What I think they left out here, and this is just for our interpretation and understanding, is that the board members might not know what is needed fiscally to run the library. They might not know how much money the librarian needs for programming, or how much money the librarian needs for supplies like toilet paper or copy paper, or how much money the library might need for books. I'm gonna stick with the books there. So what the librarian will do is let the board know how things have been and what is happening with the patrons, and let the board know if we need to increase that or hold it, or if we could even decrease the print materials and add some to electronic or digital. So the board would say, here's how much we're going to ask for overall for the library. They get that back from the city and they tell the librarian, here's how much you'll have to purchase books. The board does not tell the librarian, you have $300 to purchase digital books and you have $1,500 to purchase children's books and $3,000 to purchase adult books. That's running the day-to-day of the library, and that's really the librarian's purview. The board is the big picture and the librarian is the details. So when you're presenting your budget to the city, usually it's the librarian because they have a better relationship with the city council, but there should always be a board member there as well. I think it's important for board members to establish those relationships with the city. Did that help?
Yes, thank you, Gail.
And here's Maribeth again.
Oh, internet's fun. Okay. Officer roles. Each role is laid out and spelled out by Kansas statute. So the president is the one that presides over and runs the meetings. The president can call special meetings, can appoint committees, can execute board documents. So you have to sign a contract or whatever, the board president would sign that. And here's the important one, co-signs all checks. The vice president works in absentia of the president. So when the president isn't there, then the vice president will hold his place. The secretary will keep accurate records, post notice of all meetings. That would mean post them on Facebook or post them on your window or both, and co-signs all checks. The treasurer should be a bonded position, not the person that holds the office, but the office itself should be bonded, and that amount can be set by the board how much you want to be bonded for. You can set that up, I believe, with your local bank for how to get bonded. The treasurer should keep accurate financial records, should pay out funds on order of the board, so prepare all the checks for all the bills, and make monthly treasurer board reports. You will notice that the treasurer does not sign the checks. Your check should require 2 signatures, and those signatures should not be the treasurer. This is checks and balances. You want to make sure that your person that is handling all the money cannot embezzle all your money. That's also why the director can't sign the checks either. It's one of those checks and balances. You may not have a lot of money in your budget, but I'm sure that money that you have, you want to use for library business and make sure that it's used appropriately as it is public funds.
It is the responsibility of all board members to look over the documents that the treasurer gives them to make sure that they're all on the up and up. It's not happened in CKLS, Knockwood, but embezzlement has happened in other small libraries in Kansas.
Yes, it has.
What does bonding mean?
Bonding means that they're insured for handling money up to a certain amount. Most library boards put the amount of the bond on the annual budget, but that can vary depending on the size of the library and the location of the library.
So
Anyone
I would
who handles
contact,
money should be bonded. The position should be bonded.
so I would contact my local insurance agent and they
Yes.
could help me with that? Okay,
Yes.
thank you.
Okay, next slide, please.
Here you go.
All right, so that's kind of an overview of board members, how the board is set up, what terms are, etc.
Can we talk a minute about corporate body?
Yes, let's talk about corporate body.
Okay. The board is an interesting thing, and it is called a corporate body. And what that means is that no one person is in charge. The board chair is not really in charge. You gain your power and authority by working together as a unified body. So if the board has some direction they want to give as a whole to the librarian, certainly that can be delivered by the board chair. But if any one board member wants the librarian to be doing something, what they're doing is they're stepping, and they tell the librarian to do that. What they're doing is stepping outside of that corporate body, and they're diminishing the authority of the board. Because remember, it's not any one person on the board who is the boss of the librarian. It's everyone. And that sometimes happens with new trustees. They don't quite understand their role, and they're really eager to help. But remember that the board is a corporate body and they all work together.
Thank you.
This is Patty. I have a question from the chat. Someone asks, do library boards have to have a vice president?
We'll go back to the Kansas statutes annotated, which is Kansas law, and it does require a vice president. What it also says is that if a secretary is not present, the library director can act as the secretary. I do not interpret that to mean that the board should not bother to elect a secretary, because the library director themselves plays already a very important role at the library board meeting, and that is as technical advisor.
Okay. Any other questions?
Not at this time, but I will keep you posted.
Excellent. Thank you. So now we're going to take a little bit of time and look at the system plan. And the reason we want to take some time on this is because this is how you secure CQLS system grant funding for your library. So each year, the CQLS has a system-wide plan that outlines services and grants. Patty, could you put a link to the 2020 system plan in the chat, please? And then we send those system plans to each library so that you can vote on it, send your voting representative to the CQLS annual meeting and vote on the system plan. This tells us how CQLS is going to run, how we're going to focus, and how we're going to spend money on our libraries. Part of the system plan lays out 7 standards for libraries to meet. And we created these standards from the Kansas state standards. These are created by state librarians, system consultants across the state as best practices for your library. And we picked these standards because we believe that every library can meet them, and every library meeting them provides the best service possible to their patrons. The system grant is based on the base grant, plus a per capita grant, plus allotments. Okay, next page, please, Gail. Our system plans are a 3-year cycle. The first year, we create the plan and we vote on it. The next year, you work from that plan and you earn your money. And then in year 3, you report on what you did and you receive the money. So this spring, we sent out the 2021 system plan. And in May, your voting representative voted for it. So that's year one. Next year, you will take the 2021 system plan and you will meet those standards. And then in year three, either a board member or your library director will report on what you did and then receives funds for the standards that you met.
For the voting on the plan, if another important position on the board, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a board member, it can be anyone in your community, in fact, often it is the library director, is designated in May as the voting representative for the library. The voting representative attends the annual CKLS business meeting and they vote the interest of the library.
And I would like to emphasize here that it's important to elect a voting representative that you believe can make that meeting.
Yes.
In the past, some library boards have had, well, we traditionally always make the board president the voting representative, and then we send a proxy voter, which is somebody that votes in the voting representative's stead. By the board voting for the voting representative, that gives that person power to vote on behalf of the board and on behalf of the library.
Right.
So it's a lot easier to just vote for the person that you know can make the meeting or can most likely make the meeting. And then should an emergency pop up, then you would send a proxy.
There's paperwork involved with a proxy, and I'm always real keen on the least amount of paperwork possible.
Yes, and the paperwork for the proxy is what transfers the power basically from your voting rep that your board elected to your proxy.
Right.
Okay, next page, please.
And remember that vote is not the interest of the person voting. So this is a conversation that you want to have based on the information that's provided ahead of time that you want to have with your board and with your librarian, because oftentimes the librarian is the one that's most educated about these things because they're watching the daily messages that come through to them. And they're going to help guide you in what is best for your library. And it might not necessarily be what's popular. However, this is one of those cases that once you make that decision, you are all expected to, as a group, agree with that decision, even if there's something personal that you disagree with. So that's one of the hardest parts about being a member of a board, because your representation to the public is as a group, not as 7 individual people.
Right. And just as in May you elect your officers for the board, every May you need to elect, and it needs to be noted in the minutes, who the voting representative is.
Okay, thank you. And I put a link here in the chat about potential grants to receive in 2021. So what you do this year to get your money for next year. Go ahead and browse that and put any questions you have in the chat. I'm going to go over the standards real quick. There's a link to it. Patty's already put that in the chat as well. She can put that again. Standard 1 is sending that voting representative to the full system board meeting. This one says both because we changed it to one annual meeting after we had already approved the plan for 2020. So right. Sending your voting rep to the May meeting on May 22nd in 2020 counts for this standard. Thank you. Standard 2 is your library staff. It doesn't just have to be your library director, but it must be staff. Attend a minimum of 6 continuing education training events. They can be online or in person. They can be CKLS events, or they can be training events that are library related that are by another entity. But I ask that you run those by me first just to make sure that they do count.
The reason that we want staff to attend a minimum of 6 training events is because things change in the library world. A better trained staff results in a better library for your community.
Yes, exactly. Standard 3 is a quorum of the library board. I have a typo in there, I apologize. The library board participates in a continuing education event. By board members, you attending tonight, this counts toward that standard. And I said earlier what a quorum for your board is. For city and townships, that's 5 board members. Watching the archive of this workshop, or ones that we have later this year, or the board meeting we had in May, our trustee training we had in May, also count for this quorum, for this standard. Standard 4, library actively lends and borrows on Share It, the statewide interlibrary loan. Now we know while the state was closed down from March till May, there was no interlibrary loan going on. You will not be get any demerits for that. What we look at is that you've checked the holds queue, the listing for requests. Every day the library is open and filled the ones that you can. You're not going to be penalized because the book is checked out to one of your patrons, but we can see a little statistic that says requests gone unanswered, which means that they just cycled through and nobody looked at it, which means nobody checked it. So to make sure that your library staff are checking that Share It statewide interlibrary loan request daily. I mean, the days that you are open. You don't have to come in on days that you are not open to check. On the days you're open, you check it. Okay, thank you. Standard 5. This one's changed a little bit since it was written because remember, we write the plan a year ahead of time. And I have the date wrong on there. I promise I proofread this once.
During the COVID stay-at-home period. That's the reason. Okay.
Anyway, so submit a summer library schedule, calendar, or marketing plan, not play, plan to CQLS. The new date is now June 30th, 2020.
Yes, we've extended that because we understand that COVID-19 has really required us to change up not just what we're doing every day, but especially for summer library program.
Yes. And if there's extenuating circumstances that you might not meet that June 30th deadline, please have your library director talk with Patty so that we can work something out with you.
Don't assume that that deadline will be extended for you.
We need that communication because we want to know that you're trying for something. It can be all online. It can be whatever you need it to be, but we just need that communication. Did the library have a summer library program for elementary age children? That's K through 6. This one's important because this is what the grant that we received that pays for summer library program, that's what it's geared for. So we need to make sure that we have that group covered. You can have a program for all ages, but just make sure that that group has programming. And the third one is the library submits the summer library evaluation before the deadline. And the deadline, I believe, is September. Patty will let me know.
That deadline for that evaluation is September 10th of each year. And that has a specific set of questions that are provided the March before. But of course, in an unprecedented year, that is about to change, as I've spoken with my colleagues across the state earlier today. There will be additional questions, but they're not going to be any harder than anything else we've got to do. And hopefully it's going to make life easier when it comes time to fill in all those blanks on the annual survey.
And that evaluation is also part of meeting the requirements of the grant. Okay, next slide, please. Standard 6 is that the library has an up-to-date internet website and or social media site. What we're looking for here is that your web presence has current information about the library and programs. We would like to see that it's been updated at least once a month with your activities. Right now, if you haven't updated the public about what your hours are or your opening strategy is, this would be a perfect thing to post on your web presence, on your website or your social media site, Facebook page, whatever you have.
Yes, and if your library Facebook page says the last post is about closed for Christmas, that's obviously not an up-to-date and current information. So it's easy to keep it up to date. Maribeth has offered a lot of help to librarians on great ideas to do that throughout the year.
And, you know, if you have somebody new coming to town, the first place they might look for your library information is online. So you want to have some kind of online presence in 2020. Standard 7 is library has a continuous weeding program where a minimum of 3% of the materials are withdrawn each year. And I keep track of this by using catalog reports. I take the items that were withdrawn in 2020 divided by the items that were owned at the beginning of the year to get your 3%. And if, Gail, you click on that minimum of 3% link, I'll show them a little chart I have, and I can share this out.
There it is.
And I think I updated it beginning of June or end of May. There are a few of our libraries that we don't have, they're not on our consortial catalog, so that's why they're in purple. But the ones in green have already met their 3%.
So you can see here, the Great Bend Public Library, my library, has weeded by 3.01%. So we've met the standard. We might not have to weed anymore, but that's not really how a good weeding process works.
But we want to make
met
sure
the
you
standard.
meet that 3. Okay, there's some questions about the standards.
Woohoo.
This is Patty. One of the questions is there a dollar figure in the continuing ed standard that needs to be spent and not have to be returned to CKLS?
Oh, what a good question.
So there is a continuing education allotment. It is a pool of $700, and you report what you've spent that year. And what we do at the next year is reimburse up to $700 of what you've spent. So if you spend $529 in 2019, in 2020, you'll get that $519 back. So that pool of $700 is there. That's the theory behind
every
it.
January with $700.
So we reimburse back up to $700 of what you spent with CE.
What happens if a library goes over that $700? Because I know it's a long ways from Prairie View to Great Bend, and that's a lot of miles.
So this year, there is a continuing education competitive grant, or up to $1,000 more that you can apply for to help pay for those expenses. And those expenses can be staff time, outside library, normal library schedule, or if you have to hire a substitute. It pays for mileage, meals, if applicable, if not paid for already, and room and board should you need to stay the night before to go to an event. Okay, any other standard questions? Questions about the standards?
A related question to the CE money. Will we still be required to spend the $700 this year when most CE is online and absolutely free?
Yes.
So I think there's a little confusion about the required to spend. If you don't spend it this year, then it's still there for you to spend next year, because again, we're reimbursing what you've spent the year before.
It will roll over.
It'll roll over.
It may not be possible to spend $700 this year. It's just going to roll over. Whatever's left will roll over into next year to be spent in a more normal year.
Phil, do you have a question, or are you just adjusting your camera? You're muted. Okay. I think you adjusted your camera.
That question about the CE is an interesting question. And the year is only half over. And of course, with COVID-19, we have no idea what the fall looks like. But there are two conferences that were planned for Kansas later this fall. One of them is the Kansas Library Association Conference, which at this point, the plan is that they're able to make that a very reduced cost to Kansas Library Association members. The other conference is ARSL, the Association for Rural and Small Libraries. That conference was planned for late September, early October in Wichita. The decision was made for that conference to go virtual as well. And today on a meeting, we discussed what that cost would be. So there are still opportunities out there to spend some of that money. However, if you don't spend it, it doesn't go away. It just gets rolled over. So have no concern there that your money doesn't go away. There was a question about.
I think Phil, did you have a question? Because you are unmuted.
No, I was just trying to make an adjustment. Sorry.
Oh, okay. No problem. No problem. All right. Go ahead, Patty.
And then there was a question about how Storytime works into the new system plan. Would you
For
like me to address?
2020?
That is correct.
So Storytime is now a grant instead of a standard to meet. We realized that some of our libraries weren't able to have a story time because they didn't have kids during the spring or fall to come to story time. They come in the summer for summer library program, but they weren't there during the school year. So we moved it to a grant, which you can apply for the fall. I will send a link to the grants page.
There is no local matching amount for that. If you apply for it, you will get it. Every public library is eligible. The total grant amount is $300. It is intended to supplement but not replace the library's budgeted amount for Storytime. All Storytime grant money that you receive must be spent on Storytime programming. Patty, would you explain what that means?
So that $300 will require, to receive that grant, one of the requirements is you have to submit your flyer to make your minimum numbers, and that's based on your library category size. But the other part of it is you do need to show an expense report of what you spent that money on. And so some of those eligible expenses might be books for actual story time, because you may not have a whole lot of money in your budget for children's books, but here's an opportunity to throw some money that direction. It might be for those craft supplies, or if you do snacks, or if you provide some little trinket for the children completing story time, or whatever it is. But that money, it doesn't need to be a line by line. I don't know that you need to spend, $2.96 on this thing and $4 on that thing.
Right.
But we're looking at craft supplies, $39 from oil trading. New books.
What the big intent is that this money will go into Storytime programming. It will not go to buy copy paper, pay salaries, pay for the electric bill.
And then for next year, Storytime is rolled into a different pot of money. So we hope that you find a way to continue to support having a Storytime program, and that looks very different for 2021. It has less requirements to me. However, you still have great opportunities with the materials that are available from CKLSU services, and you have a trainer that is willing to help you learn how to do your very best story program. So you have something that not every regional library system in Kansas has.
All right, thank you. Are there any more questions about the standards? I see one about what are the report numbers to get items at the beginning of the year and items withdrawn. On the COHOS,
send that out in an email.
On the COHOS staff homepage, if you scroll underneath the buttons, there's a list of annual reports. There's one called items earned at the beginning of the year and items withdrawn during the year. And those are the two reports I use. And they are linked in this PowerPoint, which will also go out. I'm going to email out an archive for this meeting, links to all our resources, to everybody that's on the CKLS Google groups. Librarians, please share this with your board. Please forward it on to your board. Okay. Additional resources, I put this link once in the chat. It'll also be in the email that I send out. But on our Trustee Training Resource Guide page, I have the Kansas Public Library Standards, the Trustee Manual, which Patty is holding up right there, the Trustee Resource Guide, and then there's a section about budgeting with training videos on how to budget. There are resources that link to all the Kansas laws in which we've been referring to tonight. All bunch of resources, everything, even the Trustee Resource Guide and the manual are all linked on this resource guide. We can also send you print copies of the Kansas Public Library Standards, the Trustee Manual, or the Trustee Resource Guide. Just have your librarian request that and we will send that out to your library. So you can have a print copy of those things. If you'd like additional training, maybe come to your board and train your board as a whole. Please contact CKLS and we will schedule a time that works for you and your board. You can also call us on our 1-800 number. We're here to talk. If you miss us at our desk, please leave a voicemail. That voicemail is forwarded onto our emails and our cell phone wherever we might be. It always seems like people call when I go to the bathroom. So, don't be offended if I miss your call. Please leave a voice message.
Yes, yes. This is, good job, Mary Beth. Does anybody have any more questions? This time is just for questions.
Well, this is Anna from Mankato City Library.
Hello.
I was very pleased to see that the treasurer has to have a bonded position, because my president of our board emailed me today and asked me to provide her with a copy of my bond policy. And I'm thinking, what policy? I don't know anything about a bond policy. And so I said, I emailed her back and told her I would look through my records. I did that, no bond policy. And so we started emailing back and forth. And I found that our local bank has an insurance company, and that the bond policy had been gotten through them. So I went to the bank this morning and said, is your agent here? And they said, no, we'll give you her phone number. So I call the agent and I say, I paid the premium last September for the bond policy. And I said, we can't find it. And she said, well, hold on, I'll see who I sent it to. Well, she sent it to the previous treasurer, the old treasurer. And that treasurer did not bring it into the library. So we don't know what happened to it.
But you can get a replacement copy.
Yes, she's going to email me the bond policy. But
Wonderful.
our president, one of the other local in-town insurance companies, had approached her. And so she was wanting a copy of that policy to show this insurance company and get a quote from them to bring to the board. So we might be switching insurance companies, but I was very pleased to see that my position has to be bonded, because
Yes.
that confirmed for me that, yes, there was a policy somewhere.
Great, great.
Yes.
Thank you.
Patty, you say you have a question in the chat?
I do. I actually have a couple. With the board being appointed by the city, we have a city employee on the board. They are a part-time maintenance employee. Is that allowed?
Because they're not in, and this is in quotation marks for those of you who can't see me, they're not in a position of power. I don't think that will be called into question, but why don't you have your librarian email me, Gail Santy, and I will look into that and I will dialogue with them about that.
I was just checking the wording that we had earlier in the presentation, and it's other city officials are ineligible.
Yes.
Now this is a staff, not an official, so I think that means it's okay.
Right, they're not in a position of authority, I would say.
Yeah.
Your city clerk is not in a position of authority, although that would be a conflict of interest because they handle the city's money, especially if they became the library treasurer, that would be a big conflict of interest. In smaller towns, we often take who we can get, and Bernie, go ahead.
Yes, so we're a township library. I thought we only needed 5 board members. Am I wrong? Our bylaws and everything says 5 members, and it's always been that way.
I think you're 5.
I will double check my figures, but
7
yeah, I
both.
did say 7. I'll double check my figures.
Yeah, the township trustee appoints 5, which makes your quorum 3.
Now it came back.
Good, okay.
Okay,
Thank
so
you.
that was an error on my part. I apologize.
Any other questions?
Oh yeah, we're not done yet. So
Keep them rolling.
all right. We went over the budget last year with Maribeth. We went to the city council meeting, and then the city council did not vote on our budget. Now what?
So I'm a little bit confused by did not vote on the budget, because the city council has to approve the budget in some way. They may want to make changes to it, or they just may say, library, here's how much money you're getting. There are problems with both of those in that the city council doesn't know how their role in funding libraries works. And that's something that you always want to work on well ahead of time. The city council members need to be educated on this, and that's where a good trained trustee or a librarian can come into play and let them know what their role in this is. Now, I have a caveat with that. The law, Kansas law, because there is no such thing as CKLS law, trust me on that. I wouldn't want to be in that mess. Kansas law says that the library board prepares the budget and the city approves it. The board tells the city how much money they want. Being a board member requires you to be savvy and politically astute to the fiscal climate in your community. If you want all sorts of things, like, you know, you're going to go wild and get a new copier, and you don't have the money in this year's budget for it, and you want 2 new computers, I mean, you're just going Mardi Gras crazy here. And so you ask to increase the library budget enough to cover those new purchases, but the water tower is no longer any good in your community, and that's a really important thing in your small community. Or you need a new fire truck, or the sewer in the city needs to be replaced. You're going to have to understand that the library needs to get in line. The library doesn't always go to the front of the line for these things. If you try to push that agenda through, you're going to create a really bad relationship. And there's that relationship word again. And that's not a relationship that you want to be in. Yes, now you can see us. I always say, this is the library and this is the city, and you've got to work together like this. This is the director and these are the trustees. You've got to work together like this. So if they didn't approve it, ideally you would have contacted CKLS right away and we could have helped you with that. June is the month that most places submit their budget and give the budget presentation to the city. So it's time to be working on that right now. You need to contact us right away and we can help you with that. What we'll do, as I'm working with a library right now, is we'll help you create an advocacy plan. And don't think it's all scary and you got to put a suit and tie on for this. You go in as yourself and you work on building a relationship with the council. That way the library can be first and foremost in their minds, and that way the library board will be able to get the funding the library needs. What you may also need to do is look at additional sources of funding like grants and fundraisers. Next.
So I did a little bit of detective work while you were talking and spoke with the person with the question. And I discovered that this was for 2019, not for 2020. And ultimately what happened when I asked the question, did the city not give you funding at all? And they said they were in the process of trying to get the mill raised to support the library. And so they just received the same amount of money they received the year before. So that's why it didn't flag to us at CKLS, because that would have been a trigger, because Gail, if you don't get...
They would have received less money from the city, less total tax dollars. We would have had some questions to ask, because if the mill levy also went down, they wouldn't have qualified for state aid. And if you don't qualify for state aid, you don't qualify for CKLS funding. So we work our tails off with you now through the end of January to make sure that that funding is stable so you can get money for next year. Please don't wait until January to talk to us about these problems. Getting your mill levy raised or removing the cap and raising the mill levy in a community can take a little bit of time. It's not something you can say, hey, we want to do this, and you get it done right away. It can take a little bit of time. You've got to build that relationship.
I have another question about library policies. The question is, can CKLS help us or go over our library's personnel and patron policies to make sure everything is okay and legal?
We do it all the time. We are glad to do it. And you know what we do also? We share it with one another, so we really make sure it's what your community needs. We're not going to tell you, right? We're not going to tell you how old your unattended child policy should be, or how long your library checkouts are going to be. Those are things that library boards decide. We're going to give you information, and we're going to give you several different examples from communities in your size in a Word document, so you can use those and come up with something that's great for your community. Go ahead, Maribeth.
I've done this 2 different ways. You can send in the policies or whatever you want me to look at by print, or a link digital file, and I'll proofread it and send my comments back. Or I can, once we can travel, I can come up and we can go through them together, and we can discuss options, and we can kind of write them, get them filled out or figure out what you need. I have a checklist. I also have a policy resource guide that I can share with you as well, that can help you know what policies you need and examples of policies.
Yes, like Mary Beth said, we do have a checklist of the policies that all of you should have. Linda Scott said Mary Beth came to Lebanon and helped us do this. She is wonderful at this, and I agree. The policies are what the board enacts to create a safety net for the library staff when they're working with patrons, is kind of the way that I like to look at it.
Okay, are there any other questions? We're right at the hour mark from when we started.
We do have one more that I see.
Okay.
Could you please clarify voting and quorum? 5 members including president, ? And I'm going to add mayor, ? Could you please go over that a little more slowly?
Sure. So a quorum for a city library is 7 plus the mayor.
No.
Possibly plus the mayor.
The board is 7. The quorum is 5.
The quorum is 5. Your mayor is a voting member and part of the quorum. For a township or county, your membership is 5. Your county needs to have a county commissioner on it. Your township needs to have a township official on it. I don't know the proper term, I'm sorry.
Trustee.
And the trustee, and the quorum is 4.
What
Now,
about your board chair or your
the
president?
board chair is a board member just like every other board member. They are not different in any way. They are a full voting member. They do not serve just to break a tie. They are a full voting member and are counted in the quorum.
So their vote should be counted every time. If they want to abstain, it needs to be recorded that they abstained.
Can a married couple be on the board, or can a person married to the librarian be a board member?
A married couple can be on the board. A trustee trainer I knew, who was just amazing and has since retired, said one of the best people you can get on the board is the mayor's spouse, because then they've got the in to city council. A city council member's spouse could also be on the board. If the board member is married to the library director or any other library staff, they can still be on the board. Every board member, along about June or July, should fill out a conflict of interest statement, and Mary Beth has those resources in the trustee resource guide. The conflict of interest statement is especially important in those small towns where everybody knows everybody and you're related, and you might be the only person in the community who does painting. And if the library then needs to be painted, when the bids are accepted and the board decides to vote on the bids, if that board member has submitted a bid, they would recuse themselves from the vote because of a conflict of interest, and that would be noted in the minutes. I don't think a good board would be filled with entirely family members of the library director or library staff, though. Any more questions?
Looks like I have caught up with you with my questions that have shown up in the chat.
Great.
Are there other questions from the crowd, since I've kind of monopolized the question asking?
I would say afterwards, if you think of questions or you'd like some clarification on things, you can email any of the three of us, or you can even call us on the 800 number, or you could have your librarian email, and we will be glad to answer those questions for you. What I would like, while we're waiting for people to decide if they're going to have any more questions, we need to know if this format was effective. If in chat, oh, Maribeth, could you do a poll?
I can do a poll.
And a simple yes or a no. If you found this way of trustee training to be effective to you, if it was time efficient to you, you would indicate yes. And if it was not, and you would prefer a face-to-face meeting, indicate a no. We need to know for future reference. So Maribeth's going to make a fancy poll.
Okay, just a second.
We're getting lots of yeses in the chat.
Mm-hmm.
Once Maribeth gets the poll created, it's going to pop in the middle of your people
There
screen.
you go.
Should be green at the top. Answer your questions.
This is a fun magic trick, I always think.
If you've already said yes in the chat and you're able to see that screen, if you'll go ahead and mark yes or no on that box.
Give a few more seconds here.
One of the comments I see in the chat is it's okay for the librarian, but difficult to get board members because some don't have computers or speakers, and we do know that. I believe that 27 number is pretty close, Maribeth, to who's with us this evening. So we do have a good response there.
And I have a response to the chat about board members not having a computer or speakers. And you actually can meet as a group in the library and watch this via Zoom. And that way then the librarian would have the computer and the technology there and would turn the volume up so everyone could hear. Great.
And you can also call into our Zoom meetings, actually with a traditional telephone. It can be a cell phone or a landline phone. And the one thing that we would ask is you just let your librarian know that you're on the meeting, just so we can make sure that everybody gets credit for being here.
All right. I want to thank you all for being there. I want to thank you all for being brave and doing this on Zoom, and for being patient with us through our technology glitches. You know, we ran a meeting with over 100 people in it in May and didn't have a technology glitch, not one. And here we are, and there it is. That's how technology is. Thank you for understanding that and being patient with us as we worked through that. We're going to offer 2 more trustees sessions for training. It's going to be trustee topics. One is in July and one is in August. August, I know, is going to be about future planning, but I can't remember what July is. We just brainstormed this recently.
I don't think we wrote it down because we looked for it this morning, and we do have a date set for July. Is it the 6th? I think it's the 6th. Did I make that up?
Let me pull that up. Let me pull that up.
But anyway, when we have these trustee topics, the ideas come from you. So if you have any ideas of what you'd like to see specific for trustee training beyond the basics, please let us know. We'll be glad to share that with you and offer up some content that will be beneficial for everyone.
So I do have the dates. It's July 9th at 6:30. It will be online. And August 3rd at 6:30, and it will be online. And both of these, as well as this one today, are being recorded. And I will share out the archive with all our resources that we have been sharing with you to the CCALS Google group. If you're not on that, make sure that your librarian forwards it on to you, or you can contact me and I can email it to you directly if you send me your email address.
We respect your time, and we very much appreciate it that you've stayed with us for this extra 10 minutes. I want to thank you all again for being here.